Good afternoon and welcome to a special meeting of the North St. Paul Maplewood Oakdale School Board. The title of our meeting is the consideration of our superintendent contract. I welcome all those in our viewing audience and those that are on television. I'd ask the board's indulgence as I just give some opening comments and I will read them. Colleagues, we are here to act on the final piece of our superintendent search process, the approval of the contract with Dr. Ryan Lager. As we know, the most important task a school board takes on is their selection of a superintendent. The board works as a whole, not in isolation of one another. I ask each of you, are we ready to announce our next superintendent? Our decision will determine who Patty's successor is, the new face of the district. We, and we alone, own this decision. The buck stops with us. Therefore, to begin discussion, I will read the resolution that has been prepared for us. I will need a motion and a second to the resolution before we can begin any discussion. I would like each board member to comment before we call for a vote. And as your chair, I will act as the interceptor should we have any comments that may jeopardize our district, that of the candidate. I've asked Patty to also provide that support, and if we have questions about any of this, we have a medley of resources available to answer your questions. The resolution as it reads, be it resolved that the School Board of District 622 hereby approves the employment contract with Dr. Ryan Lager to serve as Superintendent of Schools in the North St. Paul Maplewood Oakdale School District for a 3-year term commencing July 1, 2015 at an annual salary of $168,000 for the 2015-16 school year. Do I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Moved by Nancy.
Second.
Second by Steve. I would like to now open for comments, questions, considerations. Michelle?
So I've prepared remarks, and just so you don't get nervous, they're 3 minutes long. So, given the recent history on this board, we'll likely see a majority of the board vote to approve this contract. Throughout this process, we've been repeatedly reminded that this is the most important decision a board makes and one for which consensus is necessary to unite the district and to give the superintendent the best opportunity for success. Our professional organization, Minnesota School Board Association, puts out this document called the Superintendent Search. It highlights the process and summarizes it on the first page. In that process, it says, quote, agree to reach consensus, end quote. We do not have consensus on our board. Our process has been slowed by multiple interventions aimed at convincing the board of the value of consensus. As a board, we've received a steady trickle of written requests to put off this decision until we have consensus. The board has not received a single written word to request us to push this through. We've had the district lawyer, the current superintendent, a former school board member, the teachers union, parents, multiple staffs, and administrators advise from their professional perspective that the board slow down and achieve consensus. Dr. Martin Luther King said, a genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus. As leaders in this district, we can't say, oh well, we couldn't find consensus. We need to make it happen. Not for us, but for the 10,000 kids who are educated in this district. Our district is hurting. We're hiring a superintendent after retaining an award-winning superintendent for 10 years. Doing her best to lead us through this process is our brand new board chair, who did have the unanimous support of the board when she became chair. We also have a brand new board member. We're on the heels of an $8 million budget cut. We're in the midst of contract negotiations with our teachers union. We have stakeholders clamoring to go out for a levy in the fall. While the current candidate may eventually prove to be the best fit for our district and someone the entire board can rally behind, pushing through this decision without consensus will only further divide the board and divide our district, putting our students in a more vulnerable learning environment than they're already facing. We're an elected board without expertise in the K-12 field. Informed, evidence-based decision-making requires that we rely on the expert advice of professionals and our community. On our district website, it says that as a board, we, quote, express and represent the view of the school district community, unquote. We do not make decisions in a vacuum. The decision is not ours alone. It's ours, but it's not ours alone. If we approve this contract now, we're doing so only on the judgment of the slimmest majority of the board, despite the fact that this judgment is in direct conflict with established best practices, advice from field professionals, and feedback from our stakeholders, all of which are telling us loud and clear that as a district, we must mold consensus, not make excuses about not finding it.
Thank you, Michelle. Anyone else? Amy?
Well said, Michelle. I just want to say that this is my 5th year on the board, and as we've done our board business, I can probably recall a couple handfuls of times where it was a 6-1, maybe one handful of time where it was 7 or 5-2. So I mean, really pretty much over 90% of the time we are united on our decision making. And I think, although we're 7 totally different people, I think the reason for that is that we all have the same thing in our heart, and that is that we want to do what's best for kids. And so when decisions come, the majority of us agree. Moving to this superintendent search, like Michelle said, it's our single most important responsibility as a board. And I think to say that the process was a little bit flawed is kind of an understatement. I think the majority of us would agree that the process was flawed. But from the very, very, very beginning, we didn't have consensus or agreement. And as things kept taking longer and longer, we had more time to receive, to review, to assess, to reflect on information that came from our employees, our colleagues, our community, and that division just got deeper. And we are at a point right now where we are totally divided. And to say that we would never find anybody that we would all agree upon, I think I would beg to differ. Because ultimately, like I said, we all want to do what's best for kids. And so I would ask my colleagues, if we want to do what's best for kids, what we need to do is we need to not approve this contract, and we need to start over. And we need to find somebody that we can all sit up here, and be proud to say this is going to be our next superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Nancy?
Well, respectfully, I have to disagree with Michelle and Amy. I do agree that each one of us wants to do the best thing for kids. That is absolutely, I'm convinced of that. However, I do think, well, for starters, whomever we select, I would expect that the board would get behind. That is our duty as a board. You select a candidate and then you rally behind that decision. That would be terrible if we deliberately tried to divide the district over that. You know, I work in a political world in my day job, and members of the Senate, members of the House get letters all the time, phone calls all the time. And you weigh that evidence. Certainly you weigh that evidence. You take everything in, and then you have to do the right thing. You have to do that. I mean, if you're swayed by every person that comes to the microphone or every person that writes you a letter, that's just wrong. You have to, certainly you consider it, but then you do, you know, what you think is best. process had integrity. We hit all the benchmarks, I thought. Now, it's interesting how 7 people can listen to the same presentation and then come to, you know, completely different conclusions. And it just happens. And superintendents are hired on split votes. They are. I mean, the individuals who led our search process were from districts that were hired the superintendent on a split vote. But after the vote, people rallied behind that individual and went forward and made it. I mean, there is nothing that says, you know, it has to be a 7-0 vote. That is just not you know, it's just not our policy. It's not in law. It doesn't have to be. There's nothing magical about it. Certainly, you listen to the evidence and then you make your, you know, your decision. I respect everyone that has reached out to us, you know, God bless them. I mean, but it's, you know, ultimately you have to do what's in your heart and what you think is the right thing. I think personally, this individual is going to be spectacular. And there's nothing, I've heard nothing that makes me think that that won't be the case. So, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Nancy. I would like to hear yet from 3 other board members. Is one of you willing to go next? Caleb, do you want to share any thoughts?
I, being the newest board member, I haven't been around as long as everyone else here has, but I do believe that my support for Dr. Lager is based on just his strengths and what he has done during his career, and I think that he has accomplished quite a few great things, and I've read different emails and taken different phone calls, different people across the district, and listened to their input on it, and I feel like his leadership ability and ability to delegate and work with people has put him in a position that would be where he's going to be a great superintendent for our schools. And I think if we were to push things, delay things, and start the search over again, we might eventually come to a consensus. It's not guaranteed, but I think if we did come to consensus with the next search, it could be that we were so concerned about time. But overall, without taking into account time or any types of levies coming up, I still support this candidate, and I believe that he is the best person to be the next superintendent.
Thank you. Caleb.
Well, I'll go. I'm not going to debate qualifications or any kind of speculations. For me, it boils down to consensus, and I'm not comfortable moving forward without that. So,
thank you, Becky. Steve?
I've struggled with this quite a bit, to be honest with everyone. I share a lot of the concerns that my colleagues on the board have shared about the process. I think that everyone would have been better served if they had felt more involved in the process, especially as it drew to a conclusion. The part of what I recollected when I was trying to reach inside and figure out what my decision would be on this is that we did meet last fall. We created a group of people within the board to seek out a search committee. We went through that process. We did approve the work the search committee was going to do. We sat in this very room and reviewed it. We voted on it. We said, yes, that's the process we want to use. And for the most part, I think that process served us very well. Whether or not it served us very well at the end of the day in determining who our final selection would be, I think is a matter that all of us will have lots of discussions about for a long time. But the fact of the matter is that during this process, we did reach out to the community. We did receive input. There could be some question about whether the board had enough time to discuss the input that we received, but from everything I can remember, there was very little negative said about any of the final three candidates. So then I had to kind of turn myself away from the process a little bit and look at the results. And I don't think that I have received as much direct face-to-face conversation as my colleagues have, but I did have some. I had some residents that reached out to me, some that I was able to get back to, and some where we played some phone tag. I had several employees in the school district share with me their concerns, but always those concerns were about the process and not necessarily the final selection, our final candidate. I can't recall one single fact that anyone has shared with me why Dr. Lager should not be our new superintendent. I've seen some of the emails. They all have a lot of "we feel uncomfortable" statements in it, but absolutely nothing that shares any fact. Not even the smallest fact that would allow me to stumble a little bit in my decision. And so then I came down like the other board members did, and I maybe reached my conclusion for a different reason, but it was what's best for the kids. And I think what's best for the kids is that we show some ownership for what is a very important decision, and we move forward in our policy setting role as a board to make sure that we always have in place policies which protect and advance the interests of the children entrusted into our care. This gentleman is qualified to do that. He's licensed to do that. He has a significant educational background to be able to do that. And the other piece that we have to move forward with, we've skirted around it, but we've never actually taken any board decision on it or had a board discussion about it, and that's this opportunity to go to our citizens this fall with a levy. And I think that anything that disrupts a process now that would delay that does not serve our children very well. And in the absence of anybody sharing with me any facts why I should change my mind and not recommend that we move forward with our process and employ Dr. Lager as our next superintendent, I have to tell everyone that no matter how hard I looked inside, I just don't have within me a reason not to endorse this gentleman, and once he moves into that role, to give him wholehearted support as a parent and as a board member and as a member of the community.
Thank you, Steve. My confidence in this candidate has never wavered. I found him to be highly educated, articulate. My numerous interactions with him have been favorable. But I've really lost sight in the last several weeks of the candidate. And my concern more has been for my colleagues on the board. And the issues facing our district are of such great magnitude that it is very worrisome to me that we as a board don't get enough opportunity to have honest, uninterrupted dialogue to talk about the issues facing this district. While we try to do our business in public, it is very difficult. It's very challenging to be as open and honest as we have to be. And I'm sitting here tonight realizing that I probably am the deciding vote. And I am struggling that we as a board have allowed this to happen. My experience in hiring a superintendent is limited to our superintendent extraordinaire. And as I look back on what that process was, it was jubilant. We couldn't wait to see that face come to the district. And because we don't have colleagues sitting up here that are willing to share that exuberance, I am fearful for our district. What kind of success are we asking if we put an individual, whoever that individual is, into a situation with such a great divide amongst those that have to give that person direction? And like I said, it's lost being about the candidate for me and about what our next steps would be. And therefore, I'm going to ask my colleagues, is there anything else that you would like to say? Do you have any questions about any conversations, any communications with the candidate that can be shared publicly, that you have questions about any ramifications? Now is the time to ask those questions. I ask you to draw upon your courage to do so, so that we understand that everybody has the same information. Does anybody have any more questions or comments they would like to state or ask? Amy.
I just want to kind of talk to something that Steve mentioned about facts. And I think that when you look back at the information that we received or the conversations that we may have had with folks, it's important to remember that some of these people, this is going to be their employer, their boss. You know, if people were coming with all these facts, it would be kind of I guess it would be defamation of character in some sense. And some of those things would probably go against data privacy. So I'd just like to point out that sometimes what's being said, it's not what's being said verbally, but what's in the context that can be very important, because sometimes people's hands are tied and they really can't say what they really want to.
Thank you, Amy. Any other comments, questions from the board? Anybody have any concerns about ramifications on either way? Legal ramifications?
That email was pretty.
I'm not sure if everybody got that. Okay. Are we ready to call for a vote? I will read the resolution one more time. Be it resolved that the School Board of District 622 hereby approves the employment contract with Dr. Ryan Lager to serve as Superintendent of Schools in the North St. Paul Maplewood Oakdale School District for a 3-year term commencing July 1, 2015, and an annual salary of $168,000 for the 2015-2016 school year. It was moved by Nancy, seconded by Steve. All those in favor of approving this contract signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. We have failed the contract on a 4-3 vote, on a 3-4 vote. Therefore, there will be no renewal of a contract. There will be no contract with Dr. Ryan Lager.
Chair Ogier, I'm sorry, I missed out on who voted the yes and the no.
Okay?
Do we need to do
May I-
a roll call, or
Oh.
could we, just so I
Amy?
have that for the record?
We'll do that. Amy? Becky? Michelle? Yes. Steve? Nancy?
Yes.
Caleb?
Yes.
And I was against. At this point, we are unable to continue with conversation other than I would like to set a special meeting to discuss next steps in filling the vacancy of our retiring superintendent. Kim, you have been asked to gather potential dates for which this could occur. Would you please provide to the board what those dates, options were?
Yeah, certainly. It looks like the best date for everybody, except for Steve. Steve has quite a conflict. We were looking at the week of April 20th. So we were looking at April 20th, 21st, 22nd, or 23rd. The consensus, Caleb, I didn't get your response, but the consensus for the other board members worked best for April 21st, but Steve did have a conflict. I think he was checking to see if that would work for him. Looks like he's doing that now. Caleb, are you available on April 21st?
Yes.
Okay.
Our next available date would have been prior to our board meeting on the
Correct.
28th.
28th, we would be looking at Tuesday, April 28th, possibly a 4:30 start. We have a 6 p.m. meeting.
I just want to stress the importance of a full board for this conversation.
Yes.
So, Steve, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I too have a conflict, but was willing to try to work around it on the 21st. But would the 28th work better for the board at a 4:30 slot? That was our regular board meeting. It would be a 4:30 start.
It's fine.
Caleb?
It works for me.
Steve, is that better for you? We will set a special meeting for 4:30 on the 21st to discuss next steps. 28th. Oh, thank you. Moved by Amy and seconded by Caleb. And we look to have a motion to adjourn our meeting. I look for a motion to make, someone to make that motion. Moved by Amy. Seconded by Nancy. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We will now adjourn to our special session, taking a 5-minute break